Lakeview's flooding came from the breach of the 17th Street Canal, which basically is a drainage canal that separates Orleans from Jefferson parishes. The levee broke on the east side and basically just let Lake Pontchartrain drain into the city. And there was a cement flood wall on top of the earth levee. And my understanding is that the cement portion somehow just couldn't take the pressure and it gave way. And when that happened, the game was over.
As soon as you cross over that canal that separates Jefferson from Orleans,
disaster, in my opinion.
it was like,
Look at people
when we first came back here, there were no insects, no rodents, no birds, there was no sound at all.
We brought it on the east side to basically the city. Let Lake Pontchartrain drain into the city.
Water line.
The game was over.
Evidence of the destruction can be seen in all directions as we travel 5 miles from the lower 9th Ward into Lakeview. Few, if any, homes remain habitable. The flooding that deluged Lakeview helped to position it as another epicenter of Katrina destruction. The breached levees allowed up to 9 feet of water to cover the neighborhood. Lakeview lies adjacent to Lake Pontchartrain and is the newest section of New Orleans. Development of the area began in the early 1900s, after the swamps near Lake Pontchartrain were drained.
They say that this is the country's worst natural disaster. Well, this is also the country's worst man-made disaster, in my opinion. We got hit by the by the London Avenue Canal over here. And the water line, you can see on the cabinets, you know, how high that water came and where it stood all that time.
As soon as you cross over that canal that separates Jefferson from Orleans, it was like, oh my God. When we first came back here, there were no insects, there were no rodents, no birds, there was no sound at all.
The breach in the 17th Street Canal levee was over 2 city blocks wide. The breach occurred on the Orleans Parish side of the levee and quickly flooded the area from the 17th Street Canal to the Marconi Canal and from Robert E. Lee Boulevard to City Park Avenue. On the east side of City Park, the London Avenue Canal breached, quickly flooding the rest of Lakeview to the west and Gentilly to the east. The flooding in the Lakeview area represents about 6% of the 145 square miles of total flooding throughout New Orleans.
To actually come back and witness your things thrown about and the destruction of your property and your whole life, actually, except for your living being, but the things that you're familiar with, the things that you call home, the things that your swing set that your little boy plays on, or your swimming pool that you swim in, you know, and it's all gone now. Yeah, so it was quite devastating.
Although the people stranded in the city after the hurricane were disproportionately African American, the flooding did not discriminate. Lakeview, a mostly white middle-class neighborhood, experienced some of the worst flooding in New Orleans.
Upon inspection when I got back, the water flooded up about 1.5 feet or so above the floorboards. It was about 6 feet above the street. This whole neighborhood is sort of raised up off the street elevation. And it sat here, it rotted out everything, rotted out all my tools. I've been working to build up my tools to renovate this house for a couple of years, and So those are all gone. I didn't have contents coverage in my flood policy. So that's kind of a wash. And so I've got a house that needs fixing up more than ever. And the only thing I have left is my rotted out air compressor in the front, which I just couldn't get rid of it because I was, you know, my pride and joy. So I don't think it's fixable, but we'll see.
Good schools, restaurants, and close access to the laid-back atmosphere of the New Orleans lakefront made Lakeview one of the hottest real estate markets in the city. Lakeview also represented one of the city's largest tax bases.
Floodwater probably got on this level to about this high, which is 5.5 feet. And we're up, you know, 3.5 feet from the ground. Used to be the kitchen. It sustained a lot of damage, obviously from the water, with the walls coming apart and the floor coming up and everything in here basically being ruined. Of course, down here is where the worst of the flooding was in the house. This used to be the den, where actually we spent most of our time. This is where the kids would play, and the TV was down here, and it was really, like I say, where we spent most of the time. At its peak, the water got above the ceiling level and into the floor above this room. The bathroom, obviously. I still have some important documents, but I'm not sure how useful they'll be to me now. Not sure if you can see the black growth going on in there.
Many of the homes in Lakeview remained intact due to the brick and slab construction. Unfortunately, the houses were submerged in floodwaters for days on end. When residents were legally allowed back into the city over a month after the hurricane, they returned to find homes severely damaged and infested by mold.
This is our living room, and the walls are partially gutted, and that's because Mike pulled a lot of the sheetrock off just to get air moving, essentially. And this is our dining room. And, you know, we're trying to get things done bit by bit. It's just tough. It's really tough. Just getting the things out of here is very, very difficult. Yeah, I mean, you can see the food. It's just, ugh. You know, it's just not something I'm really looking forward to pulling out.
It is just so very changed. To live day to day is just amazing here. People have to be very, very tolerant of frustration. There's no place to get gas, or few places. You have to go to another part of town if you want much in terms of groceries. There's a grocery store open in the neighborhood, but it's extremely expensive with very, very limited choices. And so many of the things that we take for granted, the mail delivery isn't daily. The garbage pickup, we don't know. I mean, the FEMA haulers are still taking away the debris, but you can't count on anything. You know, the grid is back up in terms of electricity, but the electricity as it comes back on is quirky, and various things work and various other things don't. And it will take a long time to figure out just some of those very basic things. It is a very foreign feeling environment. I feel like urban homesteading or something. And that sounds so bizarre, but the things that you've taken for granted are just not there. And who knows when they will be there.
I was completely flooded. I had water all the way up to the ceiling. And I don't know how long it sat there because we couldn't get back in the city. You know, it was a moratorium where they wouldn't let us back into the city for months. Yeah, and then once you did come back into the city, it was just total devastation. The smell was unbelievable. The soot. Before the mold set in, you had this black soot and mud that was all over the walls, all over everything.
Contrary to what many still believe, it was not simply Hurricane Katrina that flooded New Orleans. The majority of flooding was caused by a failed levee system. In a 6,000-page report, the Army Corps of Engineers admitted responsibility for design defects in the levee system that failed during Hurricane Katrina and caused 65% of the city's flooding. Infrastructure, like sewage and electricity, is largely restored in the Lakeview area. New floodgates, pumps, and levees are being constructed by the Army Corps of Engineers. They hope that the floodgates will be fully operational by the end of 2006, over a year following Katrina and months after the 2006 hurricane season. Meanwhile, many people in Lakeview have returned to their homes to rebuild. Others, who were forced to settle elsewhere, still wait for a variety of reasons, including progress on levee repairs, the reopening of schools, insurance disputes, and loss of jobs, among other concerns. Residents want to return and rebuild, yet for many, the obstacles are too great.
If the nation decides that this is not something that we want to do, invest all this money in flood protection, they need to understand that that means that we don't have New Orleans. And that's not something that I feel like residents of New Orleans can stand up on a soapbox and say, well, this is something we deserve. That's just the way it is. That's the way the decision works. We don't live in a flood area if we have that protection. And if we don't have that protection, there's no reason to be here.
You know, I'm not sure any city is immune from being stricken with a natural disaster. So if you don't rebuild one place, why would you rebuild any other place? You got to have a place for people to live. And if you keep deciding you're not going to rebuild after a natural disaster strikes, then you can start running out of places for people. I mean, that's basically a simplified explanation of why I think it should be rebuilt. It's home to a lot of people, and people have a right to live there. And I think the problems that caused the flooding in New Orleans were not New Orleans' fault. These were federally built levees that didn't do their job. I think we're at least owed a commitment from the government that they can rebuild and protect us better. That's my view.
Community-based groups have formed throughout the city and are uniting to support fellow neighbors and help rebuild. For example, the New Orleans District 5 Neighborhood Recovery Group, which serves Lakeview residents, has established a fund to help people return. They estimate that 85% of households polled either have or are planning to return to New Orleans. An ongoing frustration for many homeowners, however, has been the slow response from their insurance providers. Even homeowners with full insurance coverage have had to deal with countless adjusters and long delays in settling their claims.
It's home to us, to many people. And this is a place where people raise their families, they send their kids to school, they go to church, all those things that people do any place else in the country, you know, to develop a sense of community. That's what we have here.
Although New Orleans is famous to visitors for its food, music, and festive atmosphere, people choose to call New Orleans home for its quality of life, sense of community, cultural diversity, and unique spirit.
When I first moved here, I was really amazed at the numbers of people whose families had lived here generationally, and they had gone away to college or they'd gone away and established a family somewhere else, but then they came back because family was a very, very strong draw for many of the people who live here. People are very attached to this land, to this area, and that's a kind of amazing thing. I hadn't seen that in other parts of the country.
I've lived all over. Even before the military, I traveled a lot, and I've been Washington, D.C., New York, a lot of places in Pennsylvania, Virginia, San Diego, places abroad. I've lived in a lot of different cities, and New Orleans is just the top of the line. The neighborhood was a family-oriented neighborhood, quiet, and we could walk to school. It was the perfect setting for us. Regardless of what caused the flooding, we all lost. The nation as a whole lost. New Orleans is going to take, I would say, at least 10 to 15 years to rebound from this. People say, well, why would you want to rebuild? It's my home. It should be protected. If we stop eroding the wetlands, if we give the money and allocate the money that we need for the really good design of the levees, then we wouldn't have this conversation. The Netherlands, they did it, so why can't we?
This city has a sense of place like nowhere else I've ever been. And the people know where they are. You can look at people here and they don't look lost. They're here intentionally. If you're gonna be here now, if you're gonna be working here now, it's because you want to be here. You can't just you can't sit back and wait for things to happen, because nothing's gonna happen unless you make it happen.
The levee broke on the east side and basically just let Lake Pontchartrain drain into the city.
The water line, you can see on the cabinets, how high that water came.
As soon as you cross over that canal that separates Jefferson from Orleans, it was like, oh my God.
The things that you've taken for granted are just not there, and who knows when they will be there.
The things that you're familiar with, the things that you call home, the things that your swing set that your little boy plays on, or your swimming pool that you swim in, and it's all gone now. So it was quite devastating.
if you're going to be here now, if you're going to be working here now, it's because you want to be here. You can't just you can't sit back and wait for things to happen, because nothing's going to happen unless you make it happen.